Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to the Spheres of Spirit with Nancy Myers, aka the Lady of the Light. Nancy will discuss the everyday magic and wisdom of spirit which surrounds each of us, waiting to be discovered. She will share some of her remarkable orb photos, proving that our angels, guides, loved ones in spirit, and even pets surround us and guide us in our physical world. During this episode, Nancy will discuss one of the many spheres or aspects of spirit available to us based on her orb photography. She will also share a special channeled message from her guide, Leonini, and do an oracle card reading to help guide you along your personal spiritual adventure. And now, here is your host, orb photographer, author, medium, and speaker, Nancy Myers.
Hi there. Welcome to the Spheres of Spirit. I am your host, Nancy Myers. And today I am so excited to have these two gentlemen join me. Welcome to the show, Dr. Moody and Paul.
Hi, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Nancy. And thank you for having us on. And thanks for the folks listening in, too.
Awesome. Well, it is indeed my pleasure. For those of you who have never heard of Dr. Moody, yeah, you must have been on another planet, but Dr. Moody is literally a pioneer in the field of near-death experience. And Mr. Paul Perry has been collaborating with Dr. Moody for last 33 years. And you've written six or seven books, six books together. Yeah. So we're not going to talk too much about the past history of you guys because I want to concentrate today on your new book. It's called Proof of Life, Afterlife. And it's the seven
reasons to believe in the afterlife.
Thank you. So we're not going to get to all seven today, but there are a couple that I want to talk about. So, Dr. Moody, I'd like to give you the first question here. So, as I said, you started this research 5 decades ago. And I have to tell you, I've had a couple of people on the show who have had near-death experience. Mm-hmm. And they struggle with the acceptance, not only of the experience itself, but the acceptance from the people around them. Mm. Could you talk about why we, or maybe it's just a Western thing, we have such a difficult time accepting this?
Well, Nancy, do you mind me if I ask you how old you are? Because that bears into my question.
Oh, boy. No, not at all. I'm 69.
69. Well, I'm 79. And what I have realized and what you have realized is this whole thing we're in of the spirituality, it's a matter of development, right? Psychological development. It's like the one way I think about that often, you hear this phrase, the happiest life is a life of service to others. Mm-hmm. Well, when you're a kid, you hear that as an ideal, right? Seems very idealistic.
Yeah.
Then you get into midlife and it's an aspiration, something you aspire to. But let's face it, when you're your age and my age, it's just a fact of experience, right?
True.
Because you learn just because whenever you're focusing on yourself, you're always miserable. And that finally gets through your thick head. And so that's what I would say about this, that I have been through a long process with this, which goes back to not coming from a religious background. Thank God for that, being from the South. So we never went to church. Yeah, we're afraid of snakes, but just kidding on that one. But no, just was not religious. And so the idea of an afterlife to me was from a Jack Benny movie that my Aunt Edna took me to.
Wow.
About 1950 or so. And from the cartoons and the New Yorker. I mean, I thought it was just a joke. Then I went to the University of Virginia at age 18 and just took a philosophy course, and immediately I was hooked on Plato. And if you've never read him, read, oh my God, this guy, why is he still in print 2,400 years later? Well, because it's just phenomenal stuff.
Yeah.
And the Republic is about a near-death experience. That's when I learned about these things. Then 3 years later, I heard it from George Ritchie, who was a professor of psychiatry there at UVA. First living person I heard this from. So to me, this has been a long process, but where I've come to it on it is that to me, it's just obvious here at age 79 that this thing we're in is kind of an illusion. You know, it's consensual reality is just something that, to get to your point of your question, it's like people are terrified. You know, it's like because this thing that we're in is so illusory that as soon as you start subjecting it to any kind of analysis, it dissolves into fluff. Well, I'm okay with that. You're okay with that. But a lot of people are terrified by that.
Yeah.
And so where I am on it is I give up. It's like people say, well, these things are the oxygen deprivation to the brain. Well, when I was in medical school, one of my own professors told me about having this experience, not when she was near death, but when she was resuscitating her mother who died, or trying to, that she had. So if the bystanders have the same experience as the people who are resuscitated, and the bystanders are not ill or injured, then it's something else.
Yeah.
Oxygen. Now, what else it is, I give up, you know, I just, it doesn't follow from the fact that it's not oxygen deprivation to the brain, that therefore it is life after death.
Yeah.
But where I have come in my process, I think yours might be similar, is I just give up. I just can't think my way out of it.
Yeah.
It's like when I, you know, to me, Nancy, I have to walk every day. It's an addiction, like a real addiction. I have to do it, not a virtue. I have to exercise every day.
Okay.
If heaven forbid I should hurt my foot, which I don't want to even say, but would I go, for example, to Anthony Chicoria, the professor of orthopedics at NYU, who also has a PhD in physiology? Well, of course I would. I would put my foot in Anthony Chicoria's, you know, hands to.
Okay.
And this is an additional thing I know about him. In addition to being a renowned orthopedic surgeon, he also was struck by lightning in the neck, had a cardiac arrest and a near-death experience. And after his experience, began to unaccountably get interested in the piano. He had a recurrent dream in which he was playing the same piece on a concert stage on the piano. Then learned how to transcribe music, transcribed the piece, learned how to play the piano, and now, in addition to being a famed orthopedic surgeon, is also now a famed concert pianist. And so what I'm getting at is the consensual reality that we all have to spend such a great deal of energy to keep intact is just an illusion.
Yeah.
And if you look at that story of Anthony Chicoria, you'll see it is. I mean, that doesn't happen. But I could give you a dozen other things just like that, or 100 of them.
You know, I think maybe our age has something to do with it. But I also think things are shifting a little bit. I think people are becoming more accepting of this. And I see even the younger people, my clients that come to me, you know, they're coming with more of an open mind. So maybe it's a combination. So, yeah.
Well, it also is because they're seeing it happen more frequently in the world around them. Like a good example is years ago when I wrote the first book with Raymond, The Light Beyond, I was also writing a book on reversing heart disease with a cardiologist. And the cardiologist one day, he was at Case Western in Cleveland. He asked me he said, "Hey, what else are you working on, Paul?" And I said, "Well, I'm working on a book about near-death experiences." And he said, "That's nonsense. I've resuscitated hundreds of people and I've never spoken to anyone who's had a near-death experience." And then he left the nurses' station where we were talking, and all the nurses came over to me. And they said, well, that's because he never really talks to the patients. And we hear this all the time from people, near-death experiences, very frequently.
Yeah.
But then, it's been heard more and more by people in families, and they're more willing to speak about it because more and more doctors are now reporting near-death experiences of their own. Because resuscitation techniques have changed so much that people can go deeper and deeper.
These things have always happened, but in antiquity they were very rare. How common was it to almost die and get most people die?
But in antiquity they were also revered.
Yes.
And in our society it's different because of many people have a Christian upbringing, and Christian upbringing looks down on, they think of it as spirit possession, is what many of them think.
Yeah.
That's
well, and thanks to your hard work, bringing it into the mainstream. But, I had a dear friend who 25 years ago had a near death, came back and was excited to talk about it. They literally put her in a mental institute for a couple of months.
I believe it.
So it's coming back.
What's happened in the interim, due to the advent of the CPR, which is in every store now that you go into, have one of these things.
Yeah.
And so what is happening, Nancy, is that the afterlife is becoming infused in this life.
Yes.
Because now everybody knows somebody who has been over there and come back. And a lot of people, like the people with chronic heart problems that over a period of years have multiple near-death experiences. You think about this, their pathway through this life and the next is like this, back and forth. A lot of people, when you go to your work every day, in their minds, they're thinking about when they went over to the other side.
Sure.
So it's becoming infused in this life.
2 days ago, I spoke to a Hollywood producer, Evan Wasserstrom, and I spoke to him about his near-death experiences because he had 8 cardiac arrests.
Wow.
He's 36, and he had 8 cardiac arrests already. And he had near-death experiences in several of those. And that's another thing what Raymond brings up is you can be brought back from a cardiac arrest in a Walmart, because of the cardioversion machines. It happens frequently.
Yeah.
People as he says, people in the course of their life can have several cardiac arrests.
Yeah.
And that is the gold standard of a near-death experience, by the way.
Oh, you're dead. That goes into aisle 15, part A.
Well, too, I find
light over there.
On the blue light special. People that now hear of people who they'll say, "Yeah, I died on the operating table," or "I had a first question, did you have a near-death experience?"
Sure.
So I think it's becoming hopefully more understood, more accepted, less feared, and more
undeniable now.
Yeah.
I had a hernia surgery 8 weeks ago. Oh. And when I got home, people said, "Did you have a near-death experience?" I don't think they totally understood what happened.
Yeah, no. So, Paul, in the book, you guys have listed the 7 reasons.
Right.
So I have 2 questions for you.
Sure.
Why 7? And to you, what is proof?
Well, I'm going to let Raymond handle the proof part, but why 7? It just happened that way. I mean, it started out at 15, and then when we started working on them, it narrowed down. Things get, joined up with another chapter, and it narrowed down. And we felt that it would be more accessible and really better if it was 7 rather than 15.
Okay.
But maybe we'll do another book and we'll do another 15 or another 7.
Yeah.
Why proof? That's a great question.
Well, let me before I turn it over to you, Dr. Moody, because the reason number 1 is the out-of-body experience. And
Correct.
Chris, can we bring up that first slide?
Nice.
Now, as you know, I'm an orb photographer, and all these pictures that I show are ones that I have taken, and this is a pretty recent one. And I have this quote by this guy called Dr. Moody. And it says, they experience the feeling of being in a spiritual body that appears to be a sort of living energy field. And that's what I think my orbs are. And I'll show you, we'll talk about that more. But I know this is a recurring theme in NDEs. So this is kind of my proof. But what's proof for you, Dr. Moody? Thank you, Chris, for showing that.
Well, number one, thanks for that question. And I want to say this: I was a professor of logic, you know, and in the '60s and '70s, and since too. But so I have very technical notions myself about what proof is. And when I start thinking of it, I think about people like Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein and Frege and very technical material. So I first got to be known for studying these near-death experiences in 1969, because I talked to a number of people by then. In 69 and 70, I began to be invited to civic clubs and stuff like that to talk about them. And so beginning at that time, when I was still a logic professor, a lot of people would ask me, Raymond, is there any proof of this or whatever? And I would respond to them from a point of view of a logic professor, and explain all the reasons why the notion of an afterlife is not commensurable with the logical system we have.
Mm-hmm.
But what I finally realized, because people's eyes would just drift away, and but they weren't interested in the proof in the sense that I was interested in. And so I tried to figure out, what is it that these people want to hear?
Yeah.
And what I finally figured out is what the average person who is asking me that question is, more often than not, as you can imagine, is because they've lost a loved one to death, or they're thinking about their own death, or whatever. And what they simply want to know, as I finally figured out, is they want to know this: is it a rational thing to expect and anticipate that when you die, you will go into another sphere of reality? And I say, absolutely it is. And that's what people want to know from me. Mm-hmm. Now, for those people who are, interested in logic, and that's settled too. The classical objections to the question of life after death were raised by David Hume, the great skeptic of the 18th century, and more recently by the logical positivist of the early 20th century. And they raised legitimate difficulties with the question of life after death. That what has changed is that those difficulties have now been swept away. So I can say confidently, from the point of view of a person who loves to teach logic, that the logical problems are solved too. But that's not interesting to the average person who's lost. What they want to know is it a rational thing to? And it is. It's where I've reached is I give up. I just can't figure out. It's, I can't think my way out of this. It looks to me like, to my utter astonishment, there is an afterlife.
That's it's interesting the way you put that. You said, I give up. It's almost like there was a resistance because of the logic.
Well, it's because what I've always realized from the time I was a kid as an astronomer, Nancy, is that when you want to find out something, the way you proceed is you think of all the objections to it. That's how I've always thought. That's properly speaking, the skeptic point of view. But the people who call themselves skeptics, they don't know what they're talking about. It's that those folks who say, I'm a skeptic, they're just ignoramuses. They don't know what the word means. But from the point of view of a skeptic, which I am, the point of it is that you don't draw conclusions. And as a logician, I realized all the logical difficulties for you can't draw a logical conclusion. But what I mean by saying I give up is I give up. I can't think my way out of this.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. For example, I don't know if you've ever met Jeffrey O'Driscoll.
I have not.
Jeffrey O'Driscoll is an ER doctor. Okay, he was very early in that specialty. And Jeff Olson is a graphic artist who owns a graphic arts firm. And some years ago, Jeffrey Olson was in a car crash in which his leg was smashed off and his wife was killed instantly. And I think one of his children, but the other child lived. So he was taken into the hospital and they were doing the heroic resuscitations. He had a near-death experience, I believe. But Jeff O'Driscoll, the ER doctor, while this was going on, went in and had a conversation with Jeff Olson's deceased wife.
Wow.
And I mean, I could go on and give you a lot of stories like that, but my point is, these are all people that I would trust their medical judgment completely if I had heaven forbid, something happened to me. And at the same time, I say unanimously, all these doctor friends of mine say, yeah, not only was this real, but it was more real than ordinary waking reality. So that's what I give up. I can't think my way out of that.
Go ahead, Paul.
So what Raymond's talking about here is what this book is about. This book is about shared death experiences. It's not specifically about near-death experiences. I mean, near-death experiences are exceptional, but people have a near-death. When they have a near-death experience, they leave their body frequently. They have visions of other worlds. They see a bright light. They're transformed. This is about shared death experiences, though.
Yeah.
A near-death experience is subjective. It means that the person who has it is the only one who can really experience it and describe it. But a shared death experience is when a person who's dying shares their dying experience with the person who is alive. And that means that more than one person has experienced this death experience, and that makes it objective. So this book is a step removed. It's a step ahead of a near-death experience because it's about these shared death experiences.
That was a new term to me. Right. And I loved it. And I want to spend the second half talking about the shared death experience here because I believe some of the work that I do and people who have seen what happens on a deathbed and they turn and they see the angels or whatever, how right. You've classified the shared death experience. But before I do that, Paul, there was one of the 7 that I wanted to ask you about, and you called it the transforming light.
Right.
Can you explain, or you both called it, can you explain that to the audience?
People who have near-death experiences and, of course, shared death experiences, one of the things they encounter is a bright light that is more than light. It has substance to it. Children often describe it as that light that has good things in it. And it's exposure to this light that transforms people most vividly, actually, if that's the right word, most completely. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was involved in something called the Seattle study, where we studied a number of people who had near-death experiences as young people, and then we looked at how it had changed them over the decades. And it had changed them immensely. They'd been transformed by the light.
Mm-hmm.
They would have, they just had, I'll pull up exactly what they had. But the one thing was they had a decrease in death anxiety.
Yeah, I wrote all those down because it was fascinating to me.
Oh, it is. And these were long-term. They had a higher zest for living, which means that they were more type A without the anger. Many people seem to have a higher intelligence, although that is hard to judge, but they did have a higher intelligence. They had an increase in psychic abilities, which means that they were able to have 4 times as many verifiable psychic experiences as the population that has not had near-death experiences.
Wow.
Less afraid of death, of course, and they had a greater appreciation of learning. Many of these people said that when they crossed the line into what they perceived as being an afterlife, a place like an afterlife, they would frequently end up in a library, and they said they would download all the information of the universe, and then when they came back, they couldn't remember most of it, so that was tremendous frustration. But
I've
they
heard
kept
that.
trying anyway. They continued to try to learn it back.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the power of the transforming light.
So they were in probably the Hall of Records, or the Akashic Records as it's known. And I've heard that they have all the answers and come back, and then it's been not erased, but hidden from them again. Yeah. So Dr. Moody, you have obviously, well, you both have interviewed thousands and thousands of people, I am sure. And I always read about how positively this affects people. Is there another side to it? Has there been some experiences?
Well, it's I have talked over the years to a handful of people who had hellish or unpleasant experiences. And the trouble, Nancy, is that it is much harder to make inferences from a small number.
Okay.
It is from a large number, right? And so, but in addition to that, whereas the near-death experiences that we more commonly think of are homogeneous, like there's a family resemblance, they all fit together and are very coherent. The negative ones seem to be very various, like varied.
Oh, okay.
All over the place. And a number of ones that I talked with, it sounded to me like a delirium rather than a coherent experience.
Okay.
And so because of that, I don't know what to make of the ones, you do hear them, the hellish ones, but I just don't have enough information to make an assessment.
But those are pretty few and far between.
But I think there's largely at least two parts to a near-death experience. So, for example, if someone goes into a hospital, they've had a cardiac arrest. They're moved to a table. They're given cardioversion. That might be very scary and unpleasant. Mm-hmm. That might be the hellish part. And then when they start to separate from their body, it becomes a different animal.
Oh, I see.
So you start off with the pain of being human and being, standard treatment of cardiac arrest, which is getting your chest pounded on. And that would be unpleasant.
Yeah.
But then it switches over. As they get deeper into death, it switches into something else. That would be my speculation.
Yeah. And so I can't say much about, since I haven't talked to that many, to tell you the truth. But I don't know. However, I will say this, Nancy, and I'm sure you must have had this thought too. It's like, why in the world is it that so many people want there to be hellish experiences?
I know.
Well,
yeah. Well,
and that mentality is the mentality that is bringing down our civilization right now. The 14% of the people who say that I know everything that Jesus said and you're going to hell, those people are in charge. But it doesn't fit with what people who actually come close to death and, return tell us that it's like.
Well, that's what I wanted to hear from you because of the naysayers. And, even I know Eben Alexander wrote the foreword to your book, and his near death started out a little murky, but then it went beautiful, right? So, so thank you for clearing that up. So we have to take a break. And when we come back, like I said, I would like to delve a little deeper into that SDE, the shared death experience. So we'll be right back.
Sure.
Om Times TV. The story told in Entering the Light Fantastic, Discovering Life After Life Through Orbs, is about Nancy Meyer's spiritual and emotional rising from the devastating ashes of loss caused by the sudden and unexpected passing of her son Robbie. Just like the legend of the reborn phoenix, Nancy's life purpose and focus was transformed. With the help from her son in spirit, Nancy found herself providing proof through orbs that our souls do not die with our bodies. In her second book, Encircled by the Light Fantastic, A Deeper Journey into the Light with Orbs, Nancy continues chronicling her path of gaining spiritual knowledge and expanding acceptance of what is possible, while traveling to many sacred and ancient sites around the world. She shares these experiences with you along with her photographs of remarkable spirit encounters. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Is it time yet?
It's time.
Let's start time for dinner.
Oh, terrific.
Faster dinner.
Donating pet food is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
And we're back. So one of the things I so enjoyed reading about in this new book was, as I said, the category that you've come up with, the shared death experience. And Paul, if I can ask you, because I read about your father, if you don't mind sharing here now, you called it the Lazarus moment. I called it kind of the golden moment. But if you could expand on what constitutes a shared death experience, and then share a little bit about your dad.
Well, shared death experience is when a person who is dying shares their dying experience with someone who is well and healthy.
And in what way, though?
Well, physically and mentally.
Okay.
And in what way? How do they do it? How do they share it? Through a variety of different ways. It can be through, they can wake up from a deep coma and talk to you. That would be called terminal lucidity.
Mm-hmm.
They can later describe what happened to them during an out-of-body experience, and it can be very accurate information that maybe was miles away but still accurate. It can be through their transformation, because people share who they are on a daily basis, and some people who have near-death experiences are totally transformed. They're no longer the same person. Sometimes that leads to a divorce,
Mm-hmm.
because the person is no longer the same person that they were. So there's a number of different ways to share their death experience. I mean, I've had two in my own life. One was my father, and the other was my mother through somebody else. With my father was dying. He had a stroke, and he was gone. I mean, he was breathing in choppy ways, and the doctor said he would be dead before long. All of a sudden, he kind of came out of it, and he said, I'm not afraid to die.
Wow.
I'm not afraid to die because, you know, I should have been dead in World War II. You know, and he told about, you know, things that happened to him during the war that he didn't think he would come back from. And then he got tuberculosis after the war, and he nearly died from that. So he said, don't feel bad. This is an extra life for me.
Wow.
I got extra life. And then a few hours later, he passed on. My mother's was different. She was dying of Alzheimer's, and it was on a Sunday. She was dying, and all of a sudden the phone rang. I was in the house. I was going to go over to the care facility where she was, and I got a phone call from Dr. Vernon Neppy, who was the director of neuropharmacology, University of Washington. And I had worked with Vernon for a while on a book that we were planning on deja vu, because he had done a lot of research on that. And the whole thing just kind of fell apart. I got really busy. He got really busy. And then we just parted, and I hadn't spoken to Vernon in at least 5 years. And so I was surprised to get a phone call from him. And he says, you know, I was reading the newspaper today, and a female voice came to me and said, call Paul Perry. And I ignored it. And so about an hour later, I was in the sports section reading, and the voice came to me again and said, call Paul Perry. So I'm calling you, and I don't know why. And so I figured that since his specialty was tied into my mother's affliction of Alzheimer's, I said, well, I told him my mother's dying. He asked why, and I explained that. And he told me a number of things they had tried in late stage Alzheimer's to bring people back. Everything from electroshock therapy to certain being tested medications. And in the course of this conversation, I got a call from the care facility, and they said that my mother had just died.
Wow.
So to me, that was a shared death experience as
Sure.
well.
Sure.
Because, you know, even though it came in through Vernon, which I hadn't had communication with for 5 years, I just think she picked the best doctor I knew.
Yeah. 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 And again, talk about proof, right? What do we?
Yeah, right.
Well, you know. So, Dr. Moody, I want to jump ahead if I can, because one of the things I was thrilled about to read in the book was reason number 7, and it was about the Psychomantium, and I hope I'm saying that properly. Can you talk about what that is and your work involved in that? Because I've tried it, not with any success, but I have tried it and very interested in it.
It is fascinating, Nancy. And I'll say this, you know, I mentioned earlier, I've studied philosophy, and everybody kind of knows or learned in the first grade that all of this stuff that we have in the West, we call reason and logic, that was invented by a group of people in ancient Greece, you know, and from roughly 600 BC to about 320 BC. It was all figured out by these people. And so what I have spent most of my life doing is trying to figure out this amazing story of how this happened, that we have reason. And the way it starts is at places in Greece called oracles of the dead, where they had various techniques, or psychomantions, where they had various techniques. Is not like the mediumship of today. They took you through procedures during which you would seem to see and converse with your departed loved ones. And so basically, in studying the archaeological report on one of these places in about 1988, and I'd done it just because, you know, Socrates, for example, everybody knows Socrates, and everybody knows that Socrates was executed, right? Few people know that one of the reasons he was executed was that they accused him of probing into things up in the air, which was out of body travel, and probing into things underneath the earth, which was consulting the dead at these oracles of the dead. And he was specifically, by the great comic poet Aristophanes, portrayed Socrates as calling up the dead. Okay, and so logic as we have it came from these places where people went to to consult with the dead. And it's very easy to set it up. It's like what they did was one of the ways they had various ways to create what you call an optical depth. You can do it. You can just have a little dark room and put a mirror on the wall at a height where when you look up from a comfortable chair in front of it, you don't see your own reflection.
Okay.
And so you have it in a darkened room. You can paint the walls black in a closet or whatever. A little light behind you with a rheostat so you can adjust the light. And the preparation is the most important. You have to go through a process of thinking about the person who died that you want to talk with and so on, and the memories, the good things and the bad things. And then I would guide people through this. And then you put them in this mirror chamber. And what happens, and this is going to sound very crazy, Nancy, but this is the result that not just I, but others who've replicated my work get the same results. And that is that if you just take people in there, just whoever wants to come, it's about 50 to 60% of them on the first attempt will have an experience which they take to be a waking awareness visitation with a deceased loved one. The way they say it is, many people say the image of the deceased forms in the mirror. And then many people say also that then the apparition steps forward out of the mirror.
Amazing.
Aladdin and the lamp, that's based on a psychological reality that the images will actually come out of the surface. Or other people say that their experience is that their consciousness goes through the mirror and they come out on the other side into this other environment where they talk to their dead relatives.
Wow.
People, about 30% of them say that they actually hear the voice audibly hear the voice of the dead. Almost all of the rest of them say, even though there's not an auditory experience, it's a heart to heart or mind to mind. They have a communication like that. A lot of them have a visitation afterward when they get back home. It opens up something where they see Grandpa in the mirror, but then they go home a couple of days later. Grandpa appears at home too.
Can you talk about the 2 women that were there and what they got when they went home in the photographs?
Oh yeah, Paul knows. See, I am no good at anything mechanical, but Paul was more interested in that. And I don't know enough about cameras to even begin to. But Paul was really interested in that case too.
Oh, sure, because they have actual photos of orbs visiting. The story. Do you have a copy of the orbs, by the way?
Sandy sent it to me. I've
Okay.
seen them. Yes.
I don't know if you can put them on the screen. I guess you
I don't
can.
have it handy, but
Yeah.
no, I can't. Sorry, I should have.
You should. You should get a replica.
Yeah.
Hold it up or something.
Yeah.
This was a woman from Argentina who wanted to see her daughter. Her daughter had died 90 days earlier of cancer. And she brought her sister with her from Argentina. And they flew in to Alabama, where Raymond lived at the time. And she wanted to be treated right away. She was very anxious to see her daughter. And she was really rushing the process. And the process involves a number of things that Raymond does, relaxes them about their environment, talks about the person they want to see, etc. And but she didn't really participate well with that. So nothing happened. She went into the Psychomantium, spent a long time in there, and saw nothing. So she decided to return to the hotel. This was at 3:30 in the afternoon. And her and her sister were sitting on different beds talking about what had happened and how she was going to retry it the next day. And all of a sudden, into this brightly lit room, because it was in the afternoon, came these 3 orbs. And luckily, her sister pulled out her camera and photographed it, her iPhone, and took 3 photos. And you can see in the photos these orbs, together and alone. And one of them approached the woman, and she could see her daughter in the orb, and she spoke to her daughter for a long period of time. That was the strangest case I ever heard from the Psychomantium, by the way.
Wow.
The orbs, and it was so interesting. I'm so glad that there were photographs of it.
And it's in the book.
It's in the book, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in this situation of seeing spirits in the mirror, it sounds so bizarre in 2023. But if you went back to 1823, everybody knew about this, because this was something people understood, that you could, in the living room, you could set up a mirror, and by candlelight you could see images and all.
Well, didn't they call it scrying? Didn't they call it scrying?
Right.
Yeah.
And then when radio came in, see, people lost this knowledge because they were listening to the radio. But it keeps cropping up. And everybody knows about James Bond, right? And 007.
Right.
Very few people know where that came from. And it came from a guy named John Dee, 1527 to 1608, I think it was, who was the assistant to Queen Elizabeth I. Yes. And he was an eminent man of learning of his age. He brought Euclid back into Europe. He was a pioneer in special effects in the theater. And he was an archaeologist. He went around England looking at old monuments, trying to figure out who built them. But he was also a pioneer in the early intelligence work. And I actually had a couple of friends from the intelligence community who told me that some of the principles he invented, they still use. And since he was such a deep thinker about intelligence work.
Incredible.
But when the Spanish went on their peace and prosperity mission to Mexico, just kidding. Yeah. Among the things they brought back were some scrying mirrors, obsidian. And so one of them fell into the hands of John Dee, and he got to gazing in, and he said, I can see spirits in there.
Wow.
So for years, he carefully documented all of his observations of how, just like I was saying, the spirits appear in the mirror, but they come out into the room and everything. And it sounds so extraordinary. But when John Dee signed his secret communications to Queen Elizabeth, right, her nickname for him was Eyes, maybe because of his intelligence work, but maybe because he had prominent eyes. But either way, the way he signed his communications was he put two circles side by side to represent eyes. And then this was still where magic and math were still combined. So his magic number was 7. So he would put the 7 kind of over and beside the 00. So, and Fleming had, said in some interview he gave that, that was one of the people he had in mind.
I that's one of the reasons why I asked 7. Why did you pick 7? Yeah. Because of numerology, it's very mystical and what it means. But I have to tell you, I was so thrilled, Paul, just to hear you say just now that these 2 women who saw the orbs with their eyes, and took a picture, because in my line of work, people say, oh, it's the camera, it's not spirit, But I have 2 pictures that I would like to share with you guys right now. Sure. Chris, can we bring up the next photo? And this, I hope you can see that. And I quoted Albert Einstein because he said matter is energy, energy is light. We are all light beings. That's what we revert back to. But that photo, I hope you can see that face in it. That's my brother. And the picture to the right is the last photograph before he passed. And so he came in as I would recognize him. I was just a little girl when he passed. So it's, again, that proof, that we're looking for. And then I want to make sure I get this one in before we go, because this just happened on the 12th. Now, I've had this visitor with me a couple of times, but can we get the next slide, Chris? John Lennon, and I hope you can see John Lennon's face. It's kind of to the bottom center, and if you look for his mustache and his glasses, he should pop out. And when I thought, oh, why are you here? He said, look at my quote. And he said, and the quote was, I'm not afraid of death because I don't believe in it. It's just getting out of one car and into another. This is the fourth time John Lennon has appeared. I have a connection, kind of a weird connection to him. But again, it's that, is this ridiculous? Is this proof? Thank you, Chris, for that. I love that you talked about the women that had that proof in their hand, with the photographs.
Sure.
And I think it's just amazing. I think it just it kind of complements your work. I would hope.
I certainly think it does with the Psychomantium for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's other things that I always thought were proof in the Psychomantium, is when people would show up later. So someone would go into the Psychomantium and not be able to see anything in the mirrors, but later at night, maybe before they were about to go to bed, the person they wanted to see would come into the room and speak to them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes hug them and even lift them off the ground.
How beautiful is that, right?
Yeah, I know that's still a subjective description, but it's like the near-death experience. After you hear, 100 or 50 or 200 or 1,000 near-death experiences, you start to believe that there's something very consistent going on, and consistency, of course, is something that leads to proof.
Yes. So we talked about the and acceptance, but we talked about the shared death experience and some of the things, and there's many. Like I said, there's people who actually see when the person in the hospital bed says, "Oh, look, it's Grandpa standing there," and some people turn around and they can see him, or the angels, or the room changes, the temperature changes. But Dr. Moody, I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. So how does mediumship fit into a shared death experience?
Nancy, I have all my life, I've just been, I confine myself to what I have enough experience of to talk about, and I don't.
Okay.
Except that one thing I know about mediums is that I would say for sure some of them are sincere. That much I know, because my oldest friend has been a medium since she was a child. I've known her family and everything, and she's completely real. I'm sure Suzanne Giesman as well. And,
she's been on my show.
Yeah, and it's that. You think about competence and reliability, and I just don't know what to think, because there's not so much about mediumship in the Greek tradition, and I got into this through the Greek philosophy, and they knew all about near-death experiences and other things as well. Like they knew that people on the deathbed hear music or over in music and all, but they didn't. I don't know that they had an equivalent of mediumship.
Yeah. Okay. I just didn't know if you would fold that into the shared death. Okay. Okay. Well, gentlemen, this just went by way too fast. I could have done a whole nother show with you. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Everybody, the book is phenomenal. Proof of Life After Life. I highly recommend it. And any last words, gentlemen? We have 1 minute.
I want to say to the folks listening in, thank you so much. I mean, it's a great treat to me that people would listen to an old 79-year-old guy. So thank you so much for listening in, folks.
Thank you. Paul?
I'll adopt what he just said. But the old listening to an old guy is not such a bad thing, Raymond, because we spend a lot of time, a lot of tire tread, a lot of shoe leather, looking at people's experiences and trying to define what is happening.
And
So,
a lot of wisdom there, gentlemen. So thank you
kudos
for
to
what you
us.
do. Thank you for being on the show. My audience, hang on. I'm going to sign off here with Dr. Moody and Paul Perry, and I have my message from Leonini, which she always cracks me up, but here's her message. She said, "The chef finishes the perfect entree preparation with a sauce. She pours the sauce over the main dish, sometimes a hot and spicy sauce, sometimes a brown, red, yellow, or even a white sauce. The sauce can cover the entree and give it a new flavor, but underneath the entree never changes. Think of your body as the sauce which covers almost completely your soul. Is your current life meant to be hot and spicy? Is it meant to be experienced as a certain person of color? Is this sauce meant to add a new flavor or experience to your soul? Is this lifetime literally going to be all gravy? The sauce that covers your soul now is meant to enhance, to assist in this life's experience and lessons. Depending on what flavor you are wearing is what assists in this your soul's growth. The sauce immerses you, but it never completely covers up who you truly are. Yes, enjoy the immersion. Live the immersion and experience the immersion, but do not forget what is beneath the sauce. Each lifetime adds to the flavor of your soul. We know this comparison is somewhat humorous, but we also hope you understand the reasons for the flavor of your current life. This is not to say you cannot change it or add to it, for you can, but the basic lessons remain, and so does your perfect soul. So with that, I want to wish everybody a very happy holiday, and I'll see you next time on the Spheres of Spirit. Bye-bye.